Hello and welcome to Juliet and Lucy's Quiet Leadership Revolution, the podcast for senior and aspiring leaders who want to make their voice heard and their impact felt through thoughtful, reflective, confident leadership. I'm Juliet Corbett, an executive coach and strategist, and I work one-to-one with senior leaders, guiding them to find their strategic focus, empower their teams, and regain control over their time.
And I'm Lucy Gower. I'm a facilitator, trainer and coach, and I empower leaders to build their happy, confident and high-performing teams. Today we're going to be talking about if values can shape organisational culture. And I know when I do a lot of work with leaders, sometimes eyes can roll when we start talking about values. And I completely understand why. I've worked with and for a lot of organisations where values are a set of words that are put in a drawer or on a motivational poster. But actually, my belief is that when values are used well, they can make a really massive impact on the culture of an organisation. Juliet.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting, isn't it? Sometimes the leaders I work with, when I say, I think we can talk about values here, this is a relevant topic, they'll respond in different ways. Some of them are like, oh, yes, let's dive straight in. And others are, oh, do we have to? There's a skepticism sometimes around this. And we're going to get into this in more detail, but I think the core of that skepticism is that in a lot of places, there's a lot of talk about values and there's not a lot of action that's consistent with those values.
Yes.
And when you go through your career and you consistently see that people are saying one thing and doing another, of course you're going to become a bit skeptical. But actually that doesn't devalue the core idea of values. That just is a lesson in what can go wrong, which is talking the talk, not
walking the walk. So I see values as kind of our core beliefs that guide our actions. So as an individual, we have a set of values that I believe are in place by about age 7. Your values and beliefs have started to be formed. And then for organisations may have a set of values which are your key organisational beliefs that guide behaviour. And for me, I think where I've seen that skepticism too is when people have been through a values process where they've got consultants in and big workshops, and there's kind of all this noise about values, and then the piece of work is done and then everything continues normal.
It's not surprising, is it? I mean, I'd be pretty kind of uninvested in the whole process if you go through that work and then nothing changes as a result. Exactly. It's something, so in individuals, it's something that's really core to who you are. And so when we use the same word to describe that in an individual, it's slightly different in an organization. So it is core to who the organization is and what it is and the way it presents itself to the world and the decisions that it makes. But at the same time, we're going to come to this, organizational culture is something that it's not created in biology. It's not that the organization actually is an organism. It is actually then created through lots and lots of different people and the behavior and the actions of lots and lots of different people coming together to create this organization. And so it's slightly different. So there can therefore be a manufactured version of organizational values, which is I kind of think what you've just described, which doesn't emanate and bubble up from an organization. It sort of feels like it's trying to be imposed from the top or imposed from the outside, maybe even. And that is not going to end well. It's not going to have much impact.
So I see where values are working in organizations is that there is consideration and thought about what are our values and how do we need to behave in order to achieve the goals, mission, strategy that we've set. So I think there's a massive amount of value in people being involved in the formulation of what those values are and what they look like. And I think if you have a set of values that come from the top down and no one really buys into them, that can be a bit of a challenge as well. But for me, I think the bit where I see values really working is like, yes, you can have a bunch of words that are your organisational values, but it's how they play out in behaviour that is the shift in culture. So values on their own amount to nothing if they're just words.
Yeah.
When people buy into them or are part of the formulation of them and understand what that means and how I conduct myself day to day within this organisation,
Mm-hmm.
that's when you get the magic.
Yeah. So the nuance in the question is it kind of it's can values shape organizational culture? The answer is basically yes, but not on their own.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wonder whether we can go into a couple of examples
Mm.
or case studies almost around what does it look like when it's done well? So when values are then influencing actions and behaviors, and so it is shaping organizational culture, what does that actually look like? I think we've talked about
Yeah.
when it doesn't work, and I think a lot of people can probably remember situations of their own when it
Yeah.
hasn't worked, but not everyone's seen it role modeled really well.
Yeah. So I remember when I was young and I worked for a small organisation and we had a kind of team strategy away day. And there was about half a dozen of us and it was facilitated by an excellent person. And we had this whole conversation about values. And for me, it was the first time that I'd ever really thought about values in an organizational context. And we did some exercises and we came up with some words. And then we focused in on, well, what does that look like in terms of behavior? And I remember a conversation around kind of ethics and transparency. And the office manager said, well, actually, for me, that looks like I'm going to buy our provisions, our tea bags and our coffee. I'm going to make sure that they're ethically sourced. And I'm going to make sure that, I can track back the supply chain, that I'm not going to buy them for anywhere that contradicts that. And I was like, oh yeah, I get it now. That real clear, if we're saying that we are adding value to the world in anything that we're doing, we're not going to be making a negative impact.
Yeah.
So that's one example from way back when that's really stuck with me actually.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the other examples, interestingly, when I was employed, and I've had most of my employment career within education, so higher education and then schools, um, it was just before the fad, if you like, for those organisations to have named values. So in actual fact, I don't have many examples from my own working life. But what is interesting is that I therefore spent a lot of my early career in organisations where I was trying to figure out the values as I went along. I was trying to work out, and when things didn't work, in retrospect, I can see it's because that wasn't present.
Yeah.
In my coaching, I think the best example that I've seen is probably around, I don't know exactly what you'd frame it as, but maybe a value around courage or
Mm-hmm.
bravery, or combined with how that plays out around honesty as well, and transparency to some extent, and the way that that then informs, especially how people have led through really tricky redundancy processes, tricky restructuring,
Mm-hmm.
and that combination of helping leaders to understand how the organizational values have to then be tempered to some extent by an HR process. But at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, the core importance is that we are always honest and as transparent as we can be
Mm-hmm.
within a context which constrains sometimes all of the communication and at the different stages that we're communicating to different stakeholder groups around, let's say, a redundancy process.
Yeah.
So that's where I've seen it probably play out
Yeah.
most usefully for the leaders that I've worked
Yeah.
with, is something that would otherwise feel quite uncomfortable. It creates a map, a compass, if you like. It's a bit of an
Yeah.
overused cliche, but it creates a compass
Yeah.
that they can
Yeah.
then use to navigate how do I make those ethical decisions around
Yeah.
what I say and when and how.
Yeah, exactly. And a very similar, I often find that organisations have have a lot of the same words, and so I'm going to bring up
Yes.
courage again. But for example, if one of your personal values, and perhaps it could be one of your organisation's values as well, is around courage, some of the conversations that I have will play out. Well, if you're going to be courageous and live that value, then having conversations about difficult things, seeking out feedback or providing feedback that might not feel comfortable, but you're walking the walk of being courageous, because it's much easier to keep quiet and not give feedback that might be a bit difficult to give and to take. But actually, if courage and perhaps striving to learn and be better sits within your kind of values wheelhouse, if you like, then it helps you to make that decision. I need to be courageous, and I need to have this conversation. What are the things that I need to do to make it go as well as it possibly can? But I have to step into that courage. Otherwise, I'm not living my values. And when we don't live them, it can feel at odds. And if we're in an organisation where our values are at odds with organisational values, that can feel uncomfortable in itself as well.
It can, absolutely. It's interesting there that there's also a combination. So people often have a list of values. Most organizations won't just have one, they'll have 3 to 5, maybe a few more. And often the interesting examples of conversations, I can see you're laughing now. I'm going to come back to the fact they're mostly the same words. Okay, come back. But it's the combination of those that sometimes can unlock what the action should be or the decision should be. So for example, when you were saying courage, if that's one of your values, another one that's often there in some way, maybe a different word, but it's something around kindness or whatever it might be. So actually, maybe there's a way of framing, actually, it's kind to give somebody difficult feedback early and not to wait until it's really hard for them to change that behavior. So it's the combination of multiple values sometimes that can unlock a tricky situation or a tricky decision to kind of be that compass. Lucy, I can see you giggling away, desperate to share something.
I was laughing for two reasons. So one, when you said 3 to 5 values, in my view, 3 to 5 values feels about right. I know organisations with way more than that, because I don't know why we don't want to choose or put ourselves in a box and be like, well, kindness didn't make it, but we're all kind. And how they impact and what they mean becomes even more important. But it's the same as priorities, strategic priorities. I'd say 3 to 5 is about all you can manage. More than that, and you don't have values that differentiate how you're behaving in any way at all. You're just doing a massive list of how humans behave or how we want to think we behave. So the 3 to 5 sort of finger in the air number, I completely agree with. And then the other thing is just like a bunch of words. I was going to say, like, when I first started working in innovation, I became really aware of how often innovation got put in as a buzzword, and innovation often comes up as a one of the values words. And for me, I find it fascinating. I'm like, well, tell me a bit more about that. What does that look like in terms of how you behave? And sometimes people know, sometimes they don't. But I see words that are, we want to be seen as innovative, for example, without enough thought into what that looks like. And for me, if it was, and again, we're all different and each organization is different, but for me, innovation is about courage and feedback and continual learning and being brave and taking risks. And often the organization, because they put innovation on a values motivational poster, they think that's we're done, and actually I see them not playing out and taking risks. So that's why I'm laughing, because that particular word is a little bit of a bugbear for me.
But it's interesting as well. So I've worked with people who feel it's very important. I'm kind of in the middle ground here, but I have worked with people who feel it's very important that the end result is a list of words that are actually values, not just a list of random words that feel important. And actually, I think there could be, I'm not going to get into a grammatical discussion here because I won't get it right, basically. But I think, I'm not sure that innovation is a value. It doesn't feel like a value to me. What feels like a value is some of those other words that you use to describe what that means. And something like curiosity, courage, we're open to failure, which obviously also isn't a value, but that sense of resilience, maybe, like those feel like values. I'm not sure that maybe innovative isn't a value. I'm not sure that innovation is a value. Now, my personal opinion is I don't really care if the end list is a list of actual values or not. What I care is that we get a list that feels right to the organisation or to the individual.
And there's a shared understanding about what that means in terms of how we operate, how we behave. You can like make up words. I'm the same as you. I don't care.
I don't mind if they fit the right grammatical structure. But it does matter that they are the words that are understood with a shared understanding within the organization, and preferably words that aren't the same as everyone else uses. Now, the values are not the same as a unique selling proposition. So it's not about your USP, but to some extent, in the recruitment market, you've got to explain to people why they should come and work for you. So you've got to explain to your customers why they want to do business with you, regardless of the product or service fitting their needs. So there is an element of something that's a little bit more unique, and it's not the same as every single other organization. I think as well, sometimes when the list gets too long, it is because we don't like to make choices, especially as a group. We don't want to make any one person feel left out because their word didn't make it to the final list. So there's elements of kind of human nature in there. But I think it's also something about there being a baseline of a good organization. And you can obviously define good however you want to, but to be a good organization that provides XYZ product or service for certain things that just have to happen. So honesty might be one of those, like, yeah, or ethical or integrity. Like, well, I kind of think that's the baseline for being in business. Let's be honest. Like, and therefore, maybe there are other things that we can say create this organization's culture, because there are some things that we should be able to take for granted, right?
Well, I think never take anything for granted, but I think that comes back to each organization is different about how it operates and how it wants to be perceived, and the culture that exists. And so for some, I agree with you. Working with integrity is like a given, isn't it? But perhaps in some organizations, how you define what integrity looks like and how people behave might still be a given, but it might be an important value within that context or that organization. So I think, again, even on the topic of innovation, for example, my learning from working in it for many years, it means something different to everybody. And actually, every values word or made up word is going to mean something different to everybody. So part of that values process, which engages other people, is making sure that there is a shared understanding, because the chances are people will have a different view within an organization of what something means, and we've all got blind spots. We've all got different perspective on things.
And also, actually, the other thing, so in individuals, values often do stay set for most of your lifetime. Actually, that's not the truth for organizations. They will shift and change over time, and that's fine, and that's to be encouraged to some extent, as long as they're not flitting around the place all the time. But that example of integrity might be if you're leading an organization where actually you're not necessarily seeing a lot of consistent integrity, and therefore that could be really important to have in a list of values that then flows into behavior and decision making, the critical second part of that equation. And then in 5 years' time, it might be the case that actually, that's now embedded. That's embedded as part of your culture. We now probably can drop that. That now becomes a baseline expectation, and then we've got time to bring something else.
Now we can innovate. Now we've got integrity.
And elevate it onto this. Exactly. So I think actually, even though we use the same word values for individuals and organizations, there are some key differences, and that's probably one of them, is it's okay for it to ebb and flow over time. Because you as a leader, you're not dictating from the top, but you're curating what's coming up from your organization. And it's okay to curate up into a values list the things that you want to be looking and focusing on for the next couple of years. And then it's fine for that to drift away and for something else to come in, because that's been embedded. That's a useful part of the process, I think, not a short-term change, though. It needs to be kind of 3 years-ish.
I agree. I think you put that really well. I'm thinking that if somebody is listening, a leader that is listening, and they're thinking about their own organizational culture and using values to shape it, what insights we can offer that might help them?
So I think the one thing, so if you're listening and you want to take one thing away, I think it's the fact that it's the actions that come from the values that really matters. So I think let's stop rolling our eyes at the idea of values. Let's take them seriously, and let's acknowledge that it's those actions that come next that are critically important. And so using as a compass to actually make decisions is where the power comes from.
And for me, that's conversations around, okay, we said that we're going to have integrity. What does that look like for you in your role? What does that look like in terms of the decisions that we make about how we recruit people, about how our procurement process works, about how we interact with each other on a day-to-day basis, and almost listing those out so there's real clear understanding about what that behavior means and a kind of agreement on what that looks like, which can be really enjoyable. Like, it can be great because it can unearth things that are, we've all got assumptions. It can unearth different ways of looking at things. It can help you to get to know your colleagues better. If it's run well, it can be a really good session, not just for the values outcomes, but for the chat.
And that's often where the aha moment comes from, I think, the realization that shared understanding isn't quite there, and then exploring positively different people's perspectives and then coming to a conclusion. There's growth as a team in that process. So Lucy, how do you help people do this really well?
I facilitate those chats and help call people to account around innovation. Really, what does that really mean? Help me understand. So I facilitate workshops and I work directly with leaders, helping them to think about their own values and the values within their organisational culture. How about you, Juliet?
Great. Yeah, I love working with one-to-one with senior leaders on this particular topic. Actually, I find it unlocks a lot of insight and awareness, self-awareness that can be really helpful. So helping leaders through executive coaching and helping them navigate, especially if their own individual values aren't necessarily aligned to those organizational values, and what they can do about that, and what those next steps might be. So yeah, looking forward to hearing from anyone who's interested in having a conversation with me or Lucy about some of these things. Brilliant. So we're always looking for feedback and ideas. If something's really resonated with you this episode and you want to let us know, please do contact us. All our contact details are in the episode notes. So I think we're wrapping up on values today. Thank you for spending this time with us. I'm Juliet Corbett, an executive coach and strategist working one-to-one with senior leaders.
And I'm Lucy Gower, a facilitator, trainer and coach, and I help leaders develop their high-performing teams. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share with colleagues and help leverage the impact of quiet leadership revolution.